Oye, Mira, Christian Ortiz here. Listen, it's time to get real. If you haven't figured it out by now, my entire platform, no matter what social media site you find me on, is dedicated on educating startup entrepreneurs and businesses to help them grow. But I'm also a social scientist, so it's my job to educate as many people who weren't graced with a phenomenal education growing up, and that's about the majority of our country. So today I want to talk to you about intersectionality. Intersectionality is an educational framework that not many people really want you to be keen to. Intersectionality is one of these topics that are taught in CRT and in any critical race theory because it recognizes our social identities that we each hold that allows us to interact with each other, which can ultimately perpetuate into sexism, classism, and racism. Because when you don't understand how you identify truly affects the intersectionality between you and other people around you, well, then you start failing to understand the issues that are really happening in society. As members of society, we each should be deep diving into every single rabbit hole that intersectionality opens in front of us. Because if you're a Southern white man who's been raised in a racist household and surrounded by nothing but racist white people, then you're not going to understand how anybody who looks or sounds different than you lives. If you are a member of the LGBTQ community and you were raised in a household where you couldn't come out because it wasn't safe enough, versus somebody who grew up in the LGBTQ community who had open parents, then the intersectionality right there is going to cause so much conflict between two people under the same group. Same thing happens with people of color who have money versus people of color who grow up in the hood. That classism developed within intersectionality creates a lot of friction, and it expresses a lot of internalized racism for the person who has the money so that they can understand the plight of the people who don't. If we don't understand these concepts of intersectionality, then we fall into 5 categories, 5 negative impacts that intersectionality has on our society today. The first one's fragmentation. What I just mentioned, where you can't understand the experiences of another person who doesn't look or live like you, make it almost impossible for a lot of people under the same group to organize for change. The second way it impacts us is through exclusion. When a person of color was born into a situation where they know nothing of oppression, they're not going to be seen as being oppressed enough for those who are going through it. The third issue intersectionality can have is competition. It creates an unnecessary competition for resources, attention, and recognition among different marginalized groups, which is the main reason why today African Americans, the Asian community, and the Native American community have such a hard time coming together. The fourth issue that it creates is complexity. This concept of understanding intersectionality can be so complex to those who have never heard about it before. It forces you to look within and to be aware of what's happening around you. Finally, the fifth issue that intersectionality can have, rather the impact that it has on society, is marginalization. Intersectionality sometimes reinforces marginalization, no matter what your background, because it makes you feel overwhelmed or too helpless to take action. And this is where the majority of our society lies. The topic of race and injustice can be so overwhelming to most people. Ultimately, this leads to a lack of participation, engagement from BIPOC and non-BIPOC, which ultimately prevents our communities from reaching our goals.